I actually have a lot of ghost experiences, but for now I'll talk about the year I lived in a haunted house. I was 12 and my family had just moved us to a place called Kennewick, Washington. We were renting a one-story house from an older couple. My cousins, who I was super close with, helped us move in and stayed the night with us for our first couple nights. Weird stuff started the very first night. For one, the guest room had a really weird vibe that nobody cared for, so they decided to sleep in the living room. I recall hearing knocking in the walls disturbing me from sleeping well. We all asked each other who was doing it in the morning, parents included, but none of us took responsibility. Another thing that would happen, every night that I was sleeping, my closet doors would open. No matter which house I lived in, I've needed the closet closed to sleep. I got so scared waking up and seeing my closet completely open that once I tied a chain around the handles to keep the doors closed. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of the chain hitting the ground. I watched my closet doors open completely right before my eyes. I was so frozen in fear I couldn't move. I could barely breathe, and I somehow fell back asleep that way. After that, I accepted that those doors would remain open. Also, every morning that I woke up for school and walked down the hallway, I would feel like someone rushed out of the guest room and followed me down the hall right on my heels. I would sit down on a chair in the living room and feel whatever it was go past me and into our kitchen. I eventually got used to it, as weird as it sounds. When you live in a haunted house, you have no choice but to get used to what is happening to you. One night I had a girlfriend sleep over. We had a great time eating pizza and staying up late watching movies. It was about 2 a.m. when we finally turned off all the lights and settled down on the floor in the living room. The curtains to the sliding glass door we were next to were open, and it was a bright moon that night, so we could easily see into my backyard and the details of it without issue. Just as it got quiet, I randomly said out loud, "Oh, by the way, this house is haunted." She says, "What?" And just then, 3 incredibly loud knocks hit the back window. We both looked outside and there was absolutely nothing. No wind at all, even. She burst into tears and I had to calm her down by letting her know that nothing else would probably happen that night. And if I can live there and be okay, she will be just fine. I'm honestly surprised she didn't demand to be taken home. Lol. I always enjoyed the ghost timing on that one. Some other things happened in that house, like stuff getting knocked off shelves, feeling genuinely uncomfortable to be there alone even during the day, etc. We lived there less than 2 years, and I'm glad. When I was growing up, my parents would occasionally tell me the story of the time they played the Ouija board. It was when they were dating before I was born, and they had a crazy night with it where it answered all kinds of questions. There is one thing my parents are not: liars. So these stories only intrigued me to find out for myself. When I was 17, I was a senior in high school and I had my first serious boyfriend. We were both very curious to know if the Ouija board truly worked, so we bought one. My bedroom was in the basement and we set it up on my bed. It was close to midnight. We lit candles, turned the lights out, and sat cross-legged on the bed on each side of the board. We were supposed to pick a question and focus on it with our index fingers lightly touching the planchette. The question we decided to ask was, will anyone talk to us? We must have sat there focusing on that question for about 40 minutes, occasionally shaking our hands out from getting tired of being held in that position. After about 40 minutes, the planchette started to vibrate underneath our fingers. Then it slowly moved to the word yes. We stopped for a moment and looked at each other like, is this real? Then we asked, are you a spirit? And it moved away from the word yes and back to it. At this point, I noticed that I could feel a strange electricity moving throughout my body. I didn't like it. I've never felt it before or since. We decided to ask it, are you nice? and it very quickly moved to the word no. Now I'm riddled with terror. I exclaim that I cannot play anymore, and I go to pick the board up to put it back in the box, except the board will not move. Not a sliver. It felt as though it was stuck there with cement. I remember yanking with my entire body at least 3 times before suddenly it felt as if something got off the board and I flew backwards with it in my hands. I slammed it into the box and closed it. My boyfriend's face was pale. He tells me I have to go home, and I'm like, oh my God, don't leave me here. But he leaves. Here's where it gets even more scary. After I walked my boyfriend to the door, I went back down to my room. Only it didn't look like my room anymore. Don't get me wrong, nothing changed visually. It was still all my stuff, but I felt like I was in a parallel universe. I felt so far away from all that is comfort and good. I don't know how else to describe it. I'm not a religious person at all, but I was so beside myself with terror that I didn't know what to do except grab the Bible. I slept with it in my arms with the lights on. I actually slept with the lights on for the next week. I did not tell my parents what I had done because I didn't want to get in trouble for playing the Ouija board in the house or for my boyfriend staying over way later than he was allowed to. We played it when everyone went to bed. My room continued to not look or feel like mine for a couple weeks. Also, when I would get up for school in the morning, I would have to walk through a dark basement living room to get to the stairs because there was no light switch by my bedroom door for the living room, and my bedroom door was in the back corner of it. So when I would first open my bedroom door, the light in my room would cast out into the living room darkness, and for a split second I would see a black cat run from the patch of light into the dark. I would shake it off as my eyes playing tricks on me. But after a couple of weeks, I was eating breakfast upstairs with my family, and my 7-year-old sister exclaims out loud, "I keep seeing a black cat in the basement." That confirmed that it was not a trick of my eyes. Also, about a month after playing the Ouija board, my dad says to me, "I don't know why, but the basement and the stairs have really bad vibes." And it's bothering me because when I bought this house, one of the things I liked was that it had a good energy. That's when I realized for sure, without a doubt, that all of this stuff was not in my head. I had haunted my parents' house by playing that game. I learned after the fact that I was supposed to say goodbye before stopping the game. I think that had something to do with it. Another strange thing that happened, I always slept with my bedroom door locked. A few weeks after playing the game, I woke in the middle of the night to somebody jiggling my bedroom door handle violently. In the morning, I asked who was messing with me, but everyone acted like I was weird for asking. About 6 months after playing it, my stepmom was cleaning the house, found the Ouija board, and threw it away. Things started to calm down a little bit after that, but it took years for the basement to feel okay again, and honestly, it never went back to feeling the way it did before I played. I finally owned up to my dad and stepmom about what I had done. I wasn't in huge trouble, but my dad was like, "I knew the house felt different. Damn it." To this day, I feel bad for bringing that energy into the home. After that experience, I want absolutely nothing to do with Ouija boards, and they are not allowed in my home. I learned. I really don't think ghosts exist. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, and I really hate the ghost shows on TV. They are all so damn fake, it's painful. Having said that, I will tell you a story about something I experienced but can't explain, so the answer is really up in the air. I know it is hard to believe a random person on the internet, but let me say this story is 100% true, and I just want to put it out there on a non-judgmental space. I was about 14. There was a family that had lived behind us on an adjacent street, but you could walk between our yards like you find in American neighborhoods. It was late afternoon, maybe 6 p.m. There were a couple girls that lived there close to my age that I didn't know too well. They saw me in my backyard and asked what I was up to because they were bored. We ended up hanging out and they invited me over to jump on their trampoline. We talked and jumped for an hour or so. While jumping, I noticed there was a basement storm door on the back of their house, and I had actually never seen one, so I was intrigued. Most basements here just have normal stairs from the main level. I really wanted to open it and see how the door worked. I inquired about it, and the older girl said, "Yeah, we only go in there if there's a tornado. My mom said it's haunted." I had always been dismissive of haunting and ghosts and said, "Oh, I don't really believe in ghosts." The younger girl giggled, and the older one was more serious. "Go down there if you aren't afraid, then," she said, pretty much daring me to do it. Why does this sound so much like a movie? I accepted her dare and went over to the storm door and unlatched it. I pulled up the heavy door, and to my surprise, both doors actually came up at the same time due to the levers and gears. It was actually quite cool to me, so I closed it and opened it again. It was half lit from the few small windows in the basement, and a little cluttered with old junk. Not very dirty, and no spider webs, though. Seemed like a pretty normal basement. I went down the steps, and the girls actually followed me halfway down. I reached the bottom and looked back at the girls. The younger girl pointed me to keep going. I made my way close to the opposite corner of the basement and looked around. It almost seemed like someone lived down there. Books were neatly placed, and there was a little couch with an end table next to it. I looked over to a clearing behind the couch, an area that was dimly lit from a nearby window, and saw it. My whole body froze up for a moment, and I felt a massive adrenaline rush that started to shake my hands and water my eyes. About 8 feet away, a green-tinged, but mostly white, almost transparent cloud of mist, the rough shape of a man, was half floating and half standing there looking at me. I heard the girls run up the rest of the stairs without words. I was locked on this figure, and it was locked onto me, frozen in fear, almost like we were both waiting for the other to make a move. I felt like it was watching me, but there were no eyes or a face, just a head shape in the mist. Nothing happened, but I stood there staring into the shape for at least 15 or 20 seconds. The shape very slowly rotated around like you would expect mist to, but it kept the same shape and position. It looked like it started to stretch out an arm. I immediately turned and ran very, very fast, even though it felt like I was running in sand. I didn't look back. I just ran all the way up the stairs and out. I stopped at the trampoline about 20 feet from the basement door, and the girls were gone. I looked back at the door, still wide open, and decided I had to work the courage to go close the door. I moved over slowly to the door and grabbed the corner, peeking over it into the basement. I didn't see anything and started to close the door. About halfway through closing the door, it was ripped out of my hands and slammed shut. It was loud, and I heard the steel sound echo through the basement. It was jarring. It hurt my fingertips, and it didn't do that before when I closed the door the first time. You actually have to push it down for it to close all the way, with how the mechanism keeps it from possibly falling on your head. I stumbled back and caught myself from falling. The girls were nowhere in sight, so I just went home and sat in the living room with my parents, not saying anything. I never actually talked to those girls again. Every time they saw me, they would turn around and try to hide from me. They moved away after a couple years. My guess is that they saw it too, and it affected them more than it did me. My parents still live over there, and sometimes when I visit, I think about it. You can see that storm door from the kitchen window, and it gives me pause every time I see it. I don't know what it was. I probably never will. It didn't change my mind that much about ghosts. I simply can't explain what I saw. As far as what I saw, it's so hard to explain in words. It's definitely the shape of a man, almost like if you used a projector to put a shape on a cloud of smoke, but it wasn't neat, very wispy, and not like an image. It had a very aggressive presence, and I felt like I was in danger. I felt the overwhelming sense of an imminent attack, which is why I was full of adrenaline and almost ready to fight for my life. I had a rough upbringing and had been in many fights as a kid, so I wasn't sensitive. The adrenaline was racking my body, and I was absolutely sore that night, just like I had my ass kicked. I just knew that whatever it was, if it was real, it was not friendly, and I was going to fight if I had to and run if I had the chance to escape. I was working as a patrol sergeant for the local sheriff's office. It was a Sunday morning and I was on my way into the office. We have take-home cruisers, so I was considered on duty on my way to work. I saw on my computer that the previous shift had responded to a fatal vehicle accident on a highway not too far from where I was. I decided I would go relieve the night shift supervisor who was overseeing our response to the accident. When I got to the scene, I learned it was an accident involving a semi-truck that was hauling a tanker full of milk. What was left of the truck was pretty much just a burnt chassis. Unfortunately, the driver had a trainee with him and both were pronounced dead on the scene. Normally, patrol supervisors have the unpleasant task of informing the family about the loss in person. In this case, both drivers were from a different state. It wasn't feasible to make the notification in person. I was able to call their local police department and request they make notification to the family. I gave them my work cell phone number for any questions. We have a division that handles investigation of the cause of the accident. Once they arrive, my job is essentially managing the scene, making notifications, and communicating with our administration. Shortly after they arrived, I received a call on my work phone from the police department that was making the notification. It was one of their chaplains calling. They asked if I could confirm that one of the victims had actually passed. I thought the question was strange since I wouldn't have made the notification otherwise, but I also thought the chaplain sounded a little shaken. Death notifications can be rough, so I didn't think too much of it. I asked the chaplain if I could help with anything. They asked if anyone on the scene had the victim's cell phone. I told the chaplain I could check with the investigators. They asked if I could check because the victim's phone was continuously calling the wife and father. I asked if they were answering the calls. They said yes, but all they could hear was what sounded like machinery. We currently had tow trucks working on cleaning the debris. I went to check with the investigator about the phone. I figured it was badly damaged and still in the wreckage. I thought a malfunctioning phone might start making calls to the most recent or favorite contacts. The investigator said he recovered the phone, it didn't appear damaged, and was sealed in an evidence bag inside his cruiser. I called the chaplain back and told him we had the phone, but didn't have an explanation as to why the phone was making calls. We both were stumped and a little shaken. The logical part of me always assumes it was a malfunctioning phone. Part of me always wonders if it was a final call to say goodbye. Ever since I was a kid, I used to freak my family out with knowing things that there was no way I should know and seeing and interacting with things that weren't there. I don't even remember most of it, just from what they've all told me throughout the years. When I was about 14, I started noticing weird things happening in the house, such as the usual floorboards creaking, the banister on the stairs shaking, and doors closing on their own. Then more things personal to me started happening, like I was being singled out from the family. My room was permanently freezing, even with the doors and windows shut and the radiator on full blast. Mold started to grow just in one spot up my wall and would come back whenever we got rid of it. Called the landlord who got someone out, but they said there was no issue after inspecting the wall behind the wallpaper and the floorboards. Then there was a constant smell of cigarette smoke in my room, but I didn't smoke, and any drink I had would smell of week old wine after a couple of hours, but only in my room. One night I could hear someone crying in my room. I walked in thinking it was my sister, but it wasn't, so I called her into my room and she could hear it too. Our house was the corner house on the street, and my room was on the far side of the house, so it wasn't connected to any other houses or rooms apart from my mom's room. But she was downstairs, so there was no way it was a neighbor crying through the wall. A couple of nights after that, I had sleep paralysis and woke up with the weight of something pinning down my ankles. All I could see was this dark shadow at the end of my bed. I was so scared, but eventually drifted back off after just watching this thing for what felt like hours. The next morning, I had bruises on my ankles in the shape of fingers. We eventually moved, and the house I have now was newly renovated, but was built on the site of an old Victorian workhouse. The old front building still stands and was turned into flats. In this house, much doesn't happen apart from sometimes seeing things moving on their own, unless it's in my bedroom. All my family have claimed to have seen the same black figure in my room. Just a huge black shadow in the shape of a large man. Every night my bed dips as if something is sat on the end, and there's always the feeling of someone watching me. I was also meditating one night, and when I opened my eyes, I was swarmed with a black smoke-like mass all around me, which vanished into thin air after a couple of seconds. We call the figure Benny as a joke. After doing some research into my house, we found out that someone was murdered in the man-made river at the end of my road, which was built during Victorian times. And the guy who did it was called Benjamin, which really freaked my sister out because our nickname was so close to this alleged murderer. My mom said either we just attracted paranormal activity or I'm being followed by something. We don't know what to make of it. I come from a pagan family, with my mom being a white witch and me also beginning to learn, so we often cleanse the house with sage and other methods, but nothing seems to work, which is why my family thinks it could be attached to me in some way.